Okay, so we went over variables, loops, if statements, case statements, and arrays. Now I should introduce you to methods. It's because we've been working with this start method for ages. So I should explain, what each segment of this actually means. Right. A method is a way, or a function in other languages, is a way for you to separate your code into more manageable chunks. So you saw before, if I just undo a couple of things, we've got all these different parts happening all in the same method. And if you keep doing that, this one method is going to get huge. You could have hundreds of lines of code that does things, and that's not really any use to people. It becomes very hard to debug, hard to read, and then you quickly lose track of what that method was supposed to do. So when you separate things into chunks, you can make each method do one particular thing, and then okay, I can call this method to do this one thing, and then I can call another method to do something else. And then because they're separate, it becomes very easy then to know what it is, but also if there are any bugs, you know which method to turn to fix it. Okay. So we're going to make a method from scratch, so we'll just delete all these. There are a few components to consider. One is how accessible the method is in respect to your entire project. And when I mean accessible, I mean if you've created a separate script, whether or not that one can access it, And you have three options here. You can write private, which means it's only accessible to the script that you've made. So in this case, this one class here. There's protected, which effectively keeps it sort of protected within, sort of the namespace that you're using. It's sort of like a semi way to hide data, So it's not completely public, but it's also not entirely private. And then the final one is public itself, which means its scope is infinite. You can access it anywhere you like. I would recommend for now, because there's a lot of stuff to do with encapsulation, to read it in your spare time if you like. For the time being, I would just put public. If you don't see this at all, it's private. So you don't actually need this line, but that's what that means. The second part is whether or not the method you're using has a variable inside it that you want to give to something else. So that's known as a return type. And it either returns something of which you denote in this signature that we're writing now. So if you wanted to return a number, like a whole number, you would put integer here, or int. So you say, okay, this method is going to return an int. Or if it wanted to return a boolean, you would put bool, or a float. You just put any data type here that it's going to return. If it doesn't return anything, meaning it's just going to execute some code and then that's it, it's not going to give any of its variables away, you put void, which sounds pretty cool, enter the void, So that's what we're going to stick with for now. So public void, and then the name of your method. So this can be anything, same with variable names. So let's call this our first method. Okay, and notice here how I've got this uppercase O, and that's just to distinguish it from variables, really. Variables usually have a lowercase at the beginning, whereas if you put a method as an uppercase, people can tell straight away that it is a method that you're calling and not just some random variable. So it just helps that way. And the final part is its input parameters, and use these normal brackets for that. And it's either going to contain an input, like an integer input, or one integer input and a float input, something like this, or it may not have anything, and in which case you just leave it blank. So that's the signature. And like with everything, pretty much, you have to open the curly braces and close them again, because you want the code associated with the method to go in inside the method and not outside somewhere else, you know. So this is what you have. And then in here, you can do whatever you like. So let's say we have one integer called 1, and then we have a second integer called 2. And just for completeness, we will have another integer called result, and just leave those three declared like this. Now what we can do is add these two together, set it into result, and then print the result. So let's say 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, and result equals 1 plus 2, just like this. And then we can use the print command that we've been doing before and just write in the result variable, and then it's going to print that. So let's save it, go back into Unity, and let's see what happens. So we clear this, it's all recompiled, we click play, and ooh, nothing's happened. So why do you think that is? You know, we've got the script, it's on the camera, it's here. You know, we go back to our code, everything seems fine, and we've written it all fine, but it's not actually doing anything. There's a fundamental reason why, and that's simply because we've created this, but we haven't actually told the compiler how to access it. So to do that, we need to call the method. So if you remember before, when we were using the start method, I said that when you press play, this is the first thing that ever happens in your code. So this is the starting point, effectively. So if we call our method in here, what should happen is it will go into this bit and actually do the code that we wrote. And to call a method, all we do is write the name, so our first method, and then any input parameters that you want to pass to it. But because our method doesn't actually have anything, we can do the same thing, follow suit, you know, just open and close the brackets, doesn't contain anything to pass along, and then we just put a semicolon on the end. So that's calling a method. So now if we save it, go back into Unity, let it recompile, if we hit play, it's displayed something, which is good. It's displayed the number 3, that's because 1 plus 2 is 3, and all job done, you know? So it does that, pretty cool. This code by itself isn't very meaningful, but you may come up with something interesting yourself, you know, that you can have multiple methods for to do all sorts of things. So, you know, one in particular is this print method. You know, I mentioned that you can create your own to do specific things. Unity's created their own print method to pass in, you know, certain number of inputs to then execute. So if you made everything in one method, you wouldn't be able to print what you wanted without all of the other code having to do its job as well, which would mean it would most likely just crash because you've got all these things happening at once. So separate your code out into methods for your own sake, but also for reusability.